All right, in this next custom visual, we'll be looking at the calendar visual. This is a really nice one I think you'll like. This one allows you to show a distribution of values across a calendar. So it looks like the screenshot you see on my slide right now, and it allows you to see a data point on each date in a calendar, and then the distribution of values is represented by the darker the color. So you'll see that as we go through the example here in a few moments. This one also allows you to have multiple rows. So say, for example, you have a data set that has multiple rows on a single date. Basically, what it's going to do is it's going to aggregate those values together and still show it as a single day on the calendar. So everything gets rolled up and aggregated by a date. This one's done by Elastic Cloud Limited, and so let's go ahead and take a look at where you can find this one and download it and start to use it. Alright, again, if you'd like to follow along with this example, you'll want to go download the calendar visual, which is going to be found at visuals.powerbi.com. And once you slide down and scroll to find the calendar visual, which is right here, you'll go ahead and download that visual, and you can also download the samples that are made available to you here as well. Alright, let's take a look at how we can use it now in our next example. So I'm going to flip over to Power BI, and I'm going to go ahead and start by importing the visual just so we can get that out of the way. I can import the visual by coming up to the visualizations pane here and hit the ellipses, and tell it that I want to import the custom visual. Yes, I'm okay with it. And we'll select the calendar visual in our custom visuals list. I'll select open, and you can see once we hit OK here that custom visual is now imported into our design surface. Now the data set that we're going to use for this is going to be a representation of sales by date, and so we need to go get that data, and you again will be able to find this data set at a link below the video that you're watching. And so I'll go ahead and select the Get Data section here and select that my data source is going to be Excel. Alright, so for this data source, we're going to be pulling in a spreadsheet or a workbook that's called Sales by Date. So that name implies that there is some date element to it, which is exactly what we need for a calendar. So I'll select Sales by Date and choose Open. Once I select Open, that's now going to pull in and give me the opportunity to pull in multiple spreadsheets. In this case, I only have one spreadsheet in this workbook, so I'll select the sales spreadsheet, which has a date and a sale, a rolled up value for all the sales that I have on a particular date. Now again, you could have a listing of a kind of line item of all the sales that you had, and you could have multiple sales for each date, and what the calendar visualization would do is it would aggregate those up together into a single date. But in this case, I've already kind of pre-aggregated the results here, which is fine as well. Alright, so I'll hit load. I'm going to go ahead and bring this data into my data model. And you can see here my field list has just the two columns. It's a very simple data set, but that's all it really needs to be for this example. And what I'd like to do before we pull in the calendar visualization is actually to bring in a card. And the reason I'm going to bring in a card you'll see here in a moment is because I want to represent and show the actual sales value here and show you how you can use the calendar, which we're going to bring in next, as a way to filter down the sales value. Now, of course, the card visualization, if you want to, you can change the formatting of it. Right now you can see it's kind of adding in some additional formatting to show a million format there, but we're going to go ahead and change that. I'm going to go under the format section here and change it so that the data labels don't auto display a format, that they actually show no additional formatting, which is going to display the value as you see here, which is what I'd like. Alright, great. So now I'm ready to use the calendar. Again, this card view in the bottom right, this card is going to be used for a visual for filtering. We're going to actually select items in the calendar, and it's going to filter this, and that's going to prove to us that the filter is working properly. Alright, so next we'll bring in the calendar visual. So I'll go ahead and select the calendar visual here. I'm going to make it take up a good portion of the screen so we can see all of the dates in here. And I'm going to go ahead and select inside of that to bring in the sales value. In addition to that, also the date. Now, what you'll notice is by default, we're not actually seeing any values represented here, and that's partially because of how Power BI works when you're pulling in dates. When you're pulling in a date value or a date data type column, it's automatically going to try to place it into some sort of a hierarchy, and you can see that over here in the field well in the middle section. You can see that it's not only showing the date, but it's also rolling it up to the year level, which is not really what I want to do here. So to fix this little issue here that's happening by default, by the way, there is a setting inside of the options of Power BI to turn this off so it never does this. But to fix this really quickly and for this visual, I can hit the down arrow next to date and tell it that I don't want to show the date hierarchy that it automatically generated for me. I just want to show the date itself. So if I select that, it'll very quickly fix my visual here. And I can see how we're doing by date, how the sales are showing by date, and I can see where the larger values, larger distribution of values are because of the darker color represented here. So again, the darker color representation, the higher the value. Now, the calendar visualization you can use as a filter, so I can click on items here. If I want to really see if the lighter or the darker color is the higher value, you can select one of the values. So if I select the darker color here, I can see here that it's showing this is $322,000 on that particular date, which that date that I happen to select was April 28th, 2016. Or if I select a lighter color here, which looks like this one is April 30th, 2016, I can see that it is a much lower value. It's $59,000, 566. So this is a nice visual in that you can select things. You can see a distribution of values across the calendar. Any of the white areas represent where there's no data. So in this case, it looks like we don't sell anything on Sundays. We must not be open on Sundays. And Saturdays is even a pretty light day. You can see Saturdays across the board is not one of our higher selling days. It's usually during the week. Fridays are a busy day of the week. Mondays are occasionally busier days of the week. But the weekends are pretty light for us. So that may tell you a little bit about your industry if you don't already know. You probably should know that about your industry. If you don't have any business on Sundays, that would tell you you're closed probably. And then my light business on Saturday here also is representative of a light area of our business. All right, so let's take a look at some of the formatting options that we have here within inside of the calendar visual. Again, the data fields here are pretty simple. You just select the date and then what kind of value or a count of values that you want to see. So if you want to see a distribution of like a head count of how many people attended work that day or how many people attended a school that day, you could do a head count across this and see which are my busier days for people missing work or missing school. Would be interesting. I could also, though, like I said, go to the formatting section here and I can change the color. So if I don't really like the blue color, the kind of standard Power BI color you get here, you can change that by going underneath the cell colors in the formatting section. And I can change the cell colors to, instead of showing that bluish green, to show something like red. Let's see a red here. So I can see it's a heat map basically here on a calendar of where my higher values are. And so it's a little bit maybe easier to see with the red. It's more definitive. And so I can look at that here and be able to see. And of course you can change it to any value you want. All right, the other things that you see in the formatting section, there's not a whole ton in the formatting section that you can do here with the calendar visual. Let me select it one more time here. You can of course add a border around it. So I added a border around it here. You can select what position you want it to be on the design surface. Locked aspect ratio, we've talked about that many times now at this point. That just makes sure that whenever you resize it, that it keeps the aspect ratio that it has here. If you want to add a background color to it, you certainly can. So I can add some kind of a background color if I wanted to, and maybe as I add in that background color, increase the transparency so it's just a little bit of a highlight there. You have that ability. And then, of course, you can change the title of it. Here it's called Sales by Date. I could change that and call it something completely different if I wanted to. You could also increase this text size of that heading, center it if you wanted to, and then make it very clear on what you're trying to get across. So there are some formatting settings. A lot of these format settings appear in every one of the visuals, but I wanted to at least give you a picture of what is available there. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. We're going to move on to our next custom visual in our next module.